Today, I'll show you how to create this beautiful composite in Affinity Photo. Let's get started. If you'd like to follow along with me, I've left a download link for today's images in the video description. So this is the main wolf image that we'll be using, and to start off, I'm going to paste our model image into the wolf document. To do that, I'll press Command or Control C to copy it. Then I'll press Command or Control V to paste it into this document. I'm going to use the Move tool to shrink it down so that all of the edges of the model photo are inside of our document. Now that we have our model in our document, I'm going to roughly cut her out by using the Freehand Selection tool. To use this tool, all you need to do is click and drag to trace around our model, and this doesn't have to be perfect. I just want it to be a nice rough outline of the model so that we can place her in the image where we want her. Once you've finished making your selection, go ahead and press on the mask icon to remove her background, and then press Command or Control D to deselect. So now I'll go ahead and select our model layer, and using the Move tool, we can move her where we want her in this image. Now, I want this model to look like she's hugging the wolf, and placing her on this side looks a little strange, so I'm going to right-click on this layer, and then I'm going to come down to Transform and Flip Horizontal to turn her around. So now I can place her in the document like this, and I think this looks a lot better. She's more nestled into the curve of the wolf, and I'm just going to make her a bit larger. Once you like where she's placed, we can go ahead and clean up the mask. So this mask is what we added to remove her background, and you can see that it's black around the outside of her, and then it appears white where she is. So what we need to do to remove this extra area that we have is that we need to paint in black to remove the rest of the background. So with that mask layer selected, I'll select the paintbrush tool, and then I'm going to change the flow and hardness settings. I'm going to make sure that my flow is set to around 70%, and then I'm going to lower the hardness to around 25%. That way I just have a bit of a softer brush as I go around and do this detail work. Make sure that your brush is also set to black, and then you can go ahead and zoom in and begin to paint away the background from our model. As you go, make sure to adjust your paintbrush size as needed, and you can do this using the bracket keys on your keyboard. And if you ever paint away too much and you would like to add some back in, you can switch your color to white by pressing X on your keyboard. At this point, I'm not trying to do anything too detailed, I'm just trying to remove the extra. We're going to go back and do a little bit more fine detail work around her hair and around her hand afterward, but for now, just make sure to remove all of the tree trunk and extra background that you can. For composites, I actually really like to just paint my selections. I find it easier than using the selection brush because I can exactly define where I want my edges to be. And in this photo, it's actually pretty hard with her dress matching the background. So I like to be able to take control into my own hands by just painting the edges where I want them. This process does take some time, so feel free to turn on some music and just take your time as you paint away the background. Now that I've finished cleaning up the background, I'm going to do a little bit of detail work around her hair and her hand to make this look more natural. The first thing I'm going to do is lower the flow of my paintbrush. And I'm going to lower this quite a bit to around 5%, and I'm also going to completely lower the hardness to 0%. So now I have a very soft, very faint paintbrush, and this will help me as I do detail work to add flyaway hairs. So to start, I'm going to make my brush super small, and then I'm just going to paint fine little lines right along the outside of her head. This will make these areas appear a bit more transparent, like there's more space in between each of the hairs, and it will look a lot more natural that she has this halo of flyaway hairs going around the outside edges of her head. You can make your paintbrush bigger or smaller to make it more or less visible. And I'll do this for the other side as well. Make sure you're painting in the direction of the hair to make this look more natural. Remember, if you've painted too much, you can always switch your color to white by pressing X, and then you can repaint those hairs back in. Once you've finished with that painting, you can check your work by holding Alt or Option and clicking on the mask. And now you can see that the edges of the hair are a bit more fuzzy. Now I'm also noticing some white patches here and there, and that's because I missed it while I was originally painting in black. So I'm going to switch my color to black. I'll bring up that flow, and then I'll quickly remove those areas. To return to your normal view, click on any other layer, and then you can click on your mask again to select it. So I think her hair's looking pretty good at this point. The next thing I want to do is I want to make it look like she's hugging the wolf. Now, if you've ever hugged a furry animal, you know that the fur is going to overlap on top of your hand as you're getting closer to the animal. So what I want to do is actually make it look like her hand is inside of his fur coat. So to do that, I'm going to lower the flow again to around 5%, and with a super small brush, about the size of a piece of fur, I'm going to come in here and add some fur strokes on top of her hand. I'm also going to make sure to really hide the tips of her fingers, which are probably curling more into the fur coat. And I can use a bigger brush to do that, just to reduce how much of the tips of the hand are visible. That looks pretty good. And then I'll go back to using a small brush to just add a little bit of fur overlapping onto the hand. And again, we want to paint in the direction that the fur is going in. So in this case, it's going sort of diagonal across her hand. And I'm going to increase the flow to around 12 just to make these hairs a bit more visible. And I'll switch my color to white to add some of her skin back in. This may look a little strange, but as you zoom out, you can see that her hand looks like it's disappearing into the fur. I'm going to continue this, just adding a bit more fur over her hand. And then we're going to start to add fur around her arm as well. I want some fur to overlap onto her arm right here, so switching my color to black, I'm going to do the same thing, just adding a patch of fur right over here. Alright, at this point, I think this is looking pretty good. It really does look like she's holding the wolf closely with that fur overlapping. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that the model blends into this image better. And one thing that I'm noticing is that our model appears to have much more detail than the fuzzy wolf in the background. So to make her look like she's blending in more, I'm going to add a Gaussian blur. So I'll go to my filters and then add a Gaussian blur. And I'm just going to increase the radius of the blur to around 0.2 pixels to make her look a little fuzzier. And I don't want this applied to the whole image, so I'll drag it down and to the right of our model so that this blur is only being applied to her. The other thing I notice is that the wolf image has a lot more noise than her. So the next thing I'm going to do is add noise. And I want this to appear on top of our blur, so I'll drag this above it. And then I'm going to increase the intensity to around 15%. You can see already that by adding this texture on top of the model, she looks like she blends in better with the image. For these next adjustments I'm going to add to our model, I want to zoom out so that I can see the whole image because we're about to change some of the lighting and colors. First, let's start off by adding a curves adjustment. This has appeared as a child layer to our model, which is perfect. I'm going to go into our colored channels first, starting in the red channel. Now you can play with these splines as much as you want, dragging them up and down to see how it affects the colors. In this case, I'm just going to drag the red down slightly. Then going to the green channel, I'm also going to drag the greens down since she has a lot of green in her dress. And last, in the blue channel, I really want to add blue to her because the whole wolf image looks very blue. And I think that looks pretty nice. You can see how she blends in a lot better with her surroundings now. The next thing I want to do is add a levels adjustment to our model. And I want to make her look less contrasted, similar to the wolf. So I'm going to move the output black level to 2%, and then the output white level to 90%. This looks really good so far, and you can see the difference that all of these child layers is making. Here's the before, and here's the after. Our model blends in so much better with the wolf. To make her blend in even better to this image, I'm going to add a shadow underneath her. To do this, I'm going to select the wolf layer, and then I'm going to add a curves adjustment. To add a shadow, I'm going to darken this curve. Then I'll invert this curve by pressing Command or Control I. So now this curve is being applied to nothing in our image, and if I paint in white on top of it, we'll reveal that darkness. I'm going to increase the flow to around 27%, and then with a larger brush, I'm going to paint a shadow underneath our model. I'm going to undo that and lower the flow a bit more, maybe to around 8%. I want this to look very soft and subtle. The wolf image doesn't have a lot of shadows going on, so I don't want this to look too harsh. I'm also going to add some shadow around where she's standing on the wolf. That way it looks like her shadow is being cast onto the wolf. And now you can see the before and after of that. This really makes the model look like she's more part of the image. As one last step to the shadow, I'm going to add another curves adjustment, and I'll make it dark again. I'll invert it with Command or Control I, and this time I'm going to add a contact shadow. This is a very dark, thin shadow right along where our model is making contact with the ground or any other surface. So you can see I've just added that darkness underneath her skirt, and now I'll come in here and make sure that we have a contact shadow going along the edges of the wolf. And you can see the difference that the contact shadow made. Here's the before and after. It looks much more realistic to do 2 layers of shadows, in my opinion. So the model looks really good right now. To make the wolf and model match just a little bit better, I'm going to add a bit of contrast to our wolf. To do that, I'll go to our adjustments and apply a levels adjustment, and I'm just going to increase the black level to around 5%, and I'll also decrease the white level to around 98%. I'll make this a child layer to the wolf. Now that the model and the wolf match really well, we're actually done with the composite part of this project, and now we'll move on to adding some extra touches to make the lighting and the colors look spectacular. Let's start by painting on some new lighting. To do that, I'll close up both of these child layers, and I'll select the model layer. Then I'll add a curves adjustment on top of everything. First, I'm going to start by making a dark curve. Then I'll invert it with Command or Control I. So with my low flow paintbrush, I'm going to paint in white over the wolf and the girl, And I want to make it like the light source is coming in from the right, so the direction that they're looking. And I'm going to add this darkness to the left side of both the wolf and the girl. So now I've added some darkness to the left side, and you can see how that looked before, and here's the after. I'm going to go ahead and add another curves adjustment, and this time I'll make it brighter so that we can add brightness to the right side. I'll press Command or Control I to invert this, and then I can begin to paint on the right side of the wolf and the girl to make it look like light is coming from the right side. Alright, and here we have it. Here's the before, and here's the after of all that lighting. Now it's time to play with some color. First, I'm going to change the color of this dress so that it looks like a golden waterfall. Right now, the color of her dress perfectly matches the wolf, but it makes it so she doesn't stand out very well. To fix this, I'm going to add a recolor adjustment layer. And I'm actually going to make this a child layer to our model. That way it only appears on our model. I'm going to make this a nice golden color. So I'll set the hue to around 40. And I'll lower the saturation quite a bit to around 35%. Then I'll press Command or Control I to invert this layer, and now I can paint it over her dress. I'll increase the flow so we can see the color better. And because this is set as a child layer, we can actually paint outside of the lines for the dress part. We don't need to worry about painting too precisely because it's only appearing on our model. However, up here by her skin and hair, I'm just going to make sure I'm painting very carefully to not get the color on her arm. If you do, feel free to switch your color to black by pressing X, and then you can remove any color that you accidentally added. I love how this golden dress looks. It kind of reminds me of Beauty and the Beast. She has the golden bell dress and he's a wolf, which is kind of like a beast. So now that we have that beautiful dress in place, I want to make it shine. So I'm going to do a special effect to this dress to make it look like it's sparkling. To do this, I'm going to add a rectangle on top of everything. So I'm just going to click and drag that on top of everything. I'll drag that to the top. And then I'm going to set this rectangle's color to black. Now that it's set to black, I'm going to change the blend mode to color dodge. So this is a special technique. I actually have a whole video on how to add shine to anything, and I'll link that below. But this is going to work perfectly for the dress. So now that we have this black rectangle set to color dodge, I'm going to right click on the layer, and then I'm going to press rasterize. So now this is a black pixel layer that we can paint on top of. So what I'm going to do is select my paintbrush tool, and I'm going to set the color to white. And then I can paint, and you can see how this adds kind of a sparkle effect to the dress. I'll undo that with Command or Control Z, and I'm going to do this with a much lower flow to add these sparkles in. To add the sparkles, I'm just going to go over the highlight areas of the dress, so trace wherever you see is already a light color to add in these nice details. Alright, so now that I've added that in, we can see the difference. Here's the before and here's the after of that shine effect. Alright, we're almost done. I'm just going to add a few more global adjustments to adjust the colors, and then we should be done. So to do that, I'm going to add a color balance adjustment, which allows you to adjust the colors in the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So starting in the shadows tonal range, I'm actually going to add a little bit of red tone. I'll add a little bit of magenta and then a little bit of blue. And you can play with these colors however you want. This is all just stylizing, making it look a little fancier. So you can choose to set these colors to whatever you'd like. For the midtones, I just added a bit of red, magenta, and yellow. And now going into the highlights, I'm just going to add some more yellow. To finish off this whole project, I'm going to add another curves adjustment. And I'm going to add a slight S-curve to add contrast. So I'm moving the highlights up a little, and then moving the shadows down. You can see that both of these adjustments have just given a little bit of added detail to put the icing on the cake of this composite. And there we have it. Our beautiful, mysterious composite is finished. It looks so pretty. If you want to learn more affinity tricks, be sure to check out my free course in the video description, where you'll learn 10 simple steps to make any photo amazing. Thanks for watching, my friends, and I'll see you in the next Affinity Revolution tutorial.